I still remember the way the air tasted that day, thick with summer heat and nerves, laced with the sugary sting of wedding cake and champagne. The church smelled like old wood and flowers, like something holy and something dying all at once. It was supposed to be the best day of my life. I guess, in a strange way, it still was. But not for the reasons you'd think. We'd made it to the altar, me in a rented tux 2 sizes too tight, her in a white dress that cost more than my truck. Her name was Bailey. Bailey Jean Carter. God, I loved her. I still do, I think. She looked like the kind of girl dreams were made of: long, soft hair twisted into curls, eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement, and lips that trembled every time she smiled. She was nervous, but so was I. We were both 23, too young to know much but just old enough to believe in forever. The pews were packed. Her family had come in from every corner of the country. Mine sat mostly in the back, a small crowd of folks who didn't talk too much or smile unless they had to. That's just how we were raised. Everything had been perfect until the priest asked if anyone had reason we shouldn't be joined. That's when it happened. A cough, loud and deliberate, cut through the silence like a rusty blade. Then her mother, Susan Carter, stood up from the front pew like she was rising out of a grave. She looked beautiful in a cruel, high society kind of way. Pearls around her neck, lipstick too bright for the occasion, heels clicking against the stone floor as she stepped into the aisle. "I do," she said calmly, like she was ordering coffee. Bailey's hand jerked in mine. My mouth went dry. Susan didn't blink. "This boy doesn't deserve my daughter. And before you all get swept away in this little fairy tale, you should know, Bailey's been cheating on him." Gasps rose like smoke. Her words were gasoline. I looked at Bailey. Her face drained of color. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I think she tried to say, "Mom," or maybe, "No," I couldn't tell. Susan wasn't finished. "He's a nobody. No future, no drive, no pedigree. Bailey needs a man who can take her somewhere in life. Not a mechanic who can barely pay rent." My mind blanked out. My heart kept pounding, but everything else was a blur. The crowd buzzed like hornets. Someone tried to hush her. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." I didn't cry. Not then. Not in front of all those people. Bailey ran out. Her heels echoed down the aisle and into the hall like she was running away from a burning building. I stood there like an idiot, alone at the altar. No vows. No ring. Just shame. But I didn't leave. Not right away. I stood there and stared at Susan, my chest tight, my fists clenched, and something dark and slow rising inside me. It wasn't hate. Not yet. But it was something close. The church emptied out like a storm had just blown through it. Chairs scraped against the floor, voices whispered behind closed doors, but none of it mattered to me. I stayed seated on the edge of the altar steps, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Bailey's mom, Susan Carter, had torn through our day like a wrecking ball. Her words weren't just loud, they cut deep. They didn't just ruin the wedding, they ripped a hole right through my heart. I couldn't believe Bailey had been cheating. That was the hardest part. Not the public humiliation. Not the whispers that followed. No, it was the betrayal itself. But I knew Bailey. I knew her well enough to believe there was more to the story. Maybe Susan was lying. Maybe she had her own reasons. Or maybe Bailey had been caught between two worlds, one her mother wanted for her, and one she wanted for herself. The truth was, Bailey and I had struggled. Money was tight. I worked hard, fixing cars in a small garage, making barely enough to keep the bills paid. Her family thought I wasn't good enough, and maybe they were right. But I loved Bailey. I thought she loved me too. Later that evening, After the guests had left and the silence swallowed the house, Bailey came back. She didn't say much. Just sat beside me, her hands shaking, her eyes full of tears. She told me Susan had been pushing her for years, pushing her to leave me, to find some rich man with a fancy job. Susan didn't want Bailey to settle for someone like me. And about the cheating, Bailey said it wasn't what it seemed. She admitted she'd made a mistake, one she regretted deeply. A moment of weakness with someone she barely knew, someone her mother had introduced her to. She said she wanted to be honest with me, and she wanted forgiveness. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me wanted to yell, to scream, to walk away and never look back. But then I looked into her eyes and saw the pain there. I realized I still loved her. That maybe love meant forgiving, even when it hurt. I told her I forgave her. That night, as we lay awake, I made a silent promise. I wouldn't let Susan Carter get away with what she'd done. She had destroyed the wedding, humiliated me in front of everyone, and tried to break us apart. I was going to make sure she paid, not just in words, but in a way she'd never forget. In the days that followed, I kept my distance from Bailey and her family. I needed time to think, to let the anger simmer into something sharper, something I could control. Susan Carter had humiliated me in front of everyone, destroyed the only day I'd dreamed of sharing with Bailey, and tried to poison her mind against me. That wasn't something I could just walk away from. But revenge isn't about yelling or punching walls. It's about patience, about making someone pay in a way that leaves them broken where they least expect it. I started watching Susan. At first, I made excuses to run into her. Need help with the garden, I said once, though I barely knew how to plant a flower. I watched how she moved, proud, sharp, careful with every step in her high heels. She thought she was untouchable. That was the mistake. I found out she liked to go on long walks in the woods near their house. Said it kept her young and strong. That's when I decided I'd make sure those walks never ended the same way again. I did my homework. I learned about the places she went, the slippery routes she'd step on, the uneven paths she loved. One afternoon, while she was out, I rigged a simple trap, nothing too obvious, just enough to make her fall hard. It wasn't a crush or a scream. It was a snap, something in her leg broke. I heard the ambulance sirens from my porch but stayed quiet. I didn't call them. I just waited. When the doctors told her she'd never walk the same way again, I felt a strange weight lift off my chest. Not joy, no. Satisfaction, maybe. Justice. Bailey found out. She cried when she came to see me, begging me to stop. To forgive. To forget. I told her I forgave her too. But Susan had to face the consequences. Sometimes, I wonder if I went too far. But then I remember the wedding day. The shame. The betrayal. And I know I did exactly what I had to do. The first time Bailey came over after everything settled, I was sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip low behind the trees. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and the promise of rain, the kind of evening that reminds you of simpler times before the world turns upside down. Bailey looked different. Softer somehow. Not just because she'd lost a little weight, or because her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. It was in the way she moved, slower, more careful, like she was trying not to break anything anymore. Especially me. I stood when I saw her. She smiled that nervous smile I'd loved since we first met in high school. "Hey," she said, voice cracking just a little. "Hey," I replied. We didn't say much at first. Just sat there on the porch, watching the colors change in the sky. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "For everything. For Mom. For the lies. For the cheating." I nodded. "I know." She reached over and took my hand. It felt small in mine, like a broken bird. But still alive. Forgiving Bailey was one thing. But forgiving her mother? That was a different story. Susan's accident had changed everything. She was no longer the proud, sharp woman who had stood in the church and shouted down my wedding. Now, she was fragile, confined to a wheelchair, dependent on others, and angry as hell. Bailey told me once that her mother hated me more now than ever. That the bitterness had grown like a weed, choking everything in its path. But I wasn't afraid. I knew Susan had lost her power, the power to hurt me, to tear us apart. We started small, dinners at my place, quiet nights talking about what had happened. Bailey wanted to fix what we could. I wanted to believe we could. Susan's fall sent shockwaves through the Carter family. Bailey's father, once a distant figure, suddenly became a caretaker, a man forced to face the consequences of his wife's cruelty. Family dinners turned into tense negotiations, with Bailey caught in the middle, trying to keep the peace. Her siblings avoided me. They blamed me for what happened to their mother, even though none of them knew the whole story. Rumors spread, some said I'd done more than just set a trap, others whispered that I was a monster. But none of that mattered. Because Bailey and I had something they didn't, a chance to rebuild, brick by brick, out of the ashes. Healing wasn't quick. It wasn't easy. There were nights when Bailey would break down, overwhelmed by guilt and fear. Nights when I wanted to scream at the world for what it had done to us. But slowly, we found rhythm again. I fixed up her old car, the one she'd used before the wedding day fell apart. We drove to the lake, sat on the dock, and watched the sunset like nothing had happened. Or maybe like everything had happened, and we'd survived. I realized that love isn't just about grand gestures or perfect moments. Sometimes, it's about standing together when everything falls apart, about forgiveness, even when it hurts. Susan's accident left her disabled, angry, and isolated. But it also freed Bailey. Freed her from the chains her mother had wrapped around her dreams. Freed us from the poison that had almost destroyed us. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Susan will forgive me one day. Maybe she never will. Maybe Bailey and I will find a way to make something new out of the broken pieces. But I do know one thing, I forgave her mother because I had to. Not for her sake, but for mine. Because carrying that kind of hate would have destroyed me. Bailey and I were trying to move forward, but the past wasn't done with us. Susan's accident changed everything, yet the silence between us often felt louder than the chaos we'd survived. We'd come a long way since the wedding day from hell, but there were moments when I caught myself wondering if we were really stronger or just holding together with cracked glue. The days began like any other, work, small talk, the quiet rhythm of normal life, but underneath it, I felt the pull of what had happened. What I'd done. What we'd all been through. Susan was trapped in her wheelchair, forced to rely on others for things she'd once taken for granted. It was a cruel twist of fate. Yet even in that fragile state, her hatred for me burned brighter than ever. One afternoon, Bailey and I drove to the Carter house. Susan was sitting by the window, staring out at the yard with eyes full of fire. "You think you won, don't you?" she spat the moment we walked in. "But I'm still here." I looked at her, feeling the weight of her anger. "You're here, Susan. But you're not the same." She laughed bitterly. "No, I'm not. And it's your fault." Bailey tried to mediate, to soften the blow. "Mom, we need to find peace. We can't keep living like this." Susan sneered. "Peace? You've chosen him over your own blood. You've betrayed me." That cut deeper than anything. Bailey's shoulders shook, tears brimming in her eyes. She looked at me, silently begging for a lifeline. I didn't have one. Not yet. As Susan's bitterness grew, so did the divide within the Carter family. Bailey's father, once a quiet man, started taking Susan's side more often, blaming me for her condition and the chaos that followed. Her siblings barely spoke to Bailey, accusing her of siding with me, of abandoning her family. I felt trapped between love and loyalty, trying to hold on to the woman I loved while watching the family around us crumble. But we weren't ready to give up. Not after everything. We spent late nights talking about our future, dreaming of a life free from Susan's shadow. We planned small trips, little escapes to remind ourselves who we were before the storm. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments, doubts, moments when the pain threatened to pull us under. But we held on. One morning, Bailey surprised me with a small package. Inside was a letter she'd written to her mother, offering forgiveness and a chance to heal. "I can't carry this hate anymore," she said softly. "Maybe it's time to let go." I nodded, feeling a strange hope bloom inside me. Maybe forgiveness wasn't just for those who hurt us. Maybe it was for us too. The morning after Bailey handed me that letter she'd written for her mother, the house felt heavier somehow. The kind of heavy that settles in your chest and makes every breath a little harder. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope she'd slipped onto the counter before leaving for work. I'd read the letter once, maybe twice. The words were simple, sincere, a plea for peace, for an end to the bitterness that had poisoned every corner of their lives. Bailey had poured her heart out in that letter, but I wasn't sure if Susan would ever read it, much less accept it. That silence between us stretched out like an endless chasm. Days passed without a word from Susan. No reply. No acknowledgement. Just the same cold glare whenever I ran into her in the hallway or at family dinners. Then, one afternoon, I found myself alone with her. It was in the kitchen, where she sat in her wheelchair staring out the window, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. "I got your letter," she said without turning around. I braced myself. "And I threw it away," she added, voice sharp as broken glass. The room went quiet. I looked at her, seeing the hurt beneath the anger, the pain she tried so hard to hide. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. Susan didn't respond. She just wheeled away, leaving me standing there with nothing but the echo of rejection. Bailey couldn't take it anymore. The tension, the silent wars, the bitterness that clung to her family like a poison. One night, she broke down in my arms, tears streaming down her face. "I want my mother back," she sobbed. "But she's gone. And I don't know if she'll ever come back." I held her tight, wishing I had the answers she needed. "We'll get through this," I promised. Together. Just when things seemed darkest, an unexpected ally appeared. Bailey's older brother, Mark, who had been distant and cold, reached out to me one evening. "I want to help," he said, eyes tired but sincere. Mark confessed that he'd been torn between loyalty to his mother and his sister, but seeing the destruction Susan's bitterness was causing made him realize something had to change. Together, we started to talk about ways to help Susan heal, to maybe soften her heart. It wasn't easy, but with Mark's help, Bailey and I began to find new ways to connect with Susan. We brought in a physical therapist to help with her recovery, hired a counselor for family therapy, and created small routines that included her in family life without pushing too hard. Slowly, the walls Susan had built around herself began to crack. One afternoon, she surprised us all by agreeing to attend a family dinner without her usual scowl. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The road ahead was long and uncertain. Forgiveness was a fragile thing, easy to shatter but powerful enough to heal deep wounds if handled with care. Bailey and I learned that love wasn't about forgetting the past but about building something stronger despite it. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other, and sometimes, that was enough. The day Susan agreed to come to dinner, I felt a strange mix of relief and nervousness. It was like walking a tightrope, knowing one wrong move could send everything crashing down. Bailey picked up her mother from the house, helping her into the car carefully. Susan's face was unreadable, no warmth, no cold, just a blank mask. At my place, I cooked something simple, chicken and vegetables, nothing fancy. I wanted the night to feel normal, peaceful. When Susan arrived, I stood by the door, awkward. She didn't say a word, but I could see her eyes scanning the room, taking it all in. Bailey greeted her softly. "Thanks for coming, Mom." Susan nodded once, and then we all sat down around the table. The dinner was quiet. No arguments, no accusations. Just the sound of forks scraping plates and the occasional cough. I kept stealing glances at Susan. Was this really happening? Was she trying? Halfway through, she surprised me. "You cooked well," she said quietly. My heart skipped. "Thanks," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Bailey smiled, the tension easing a little. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet. But it was a start. Family therapy wasn't easy. Susan was resistant at first, sitting stiffly and refusing to speak most of the time. But slowly, with the counselor's patience, cracks began to show. Susan talked about her fears, losing control, being a burden, and the guilt she carried for trying to sabotage Bailey's happiness. Hearing her vulnerability was a surprise, even to Bailey. "It's like she's trapped inside herself," Bailey said one afternoon, wiping tears. "We all are," I told her. "But we're trying to find the key." Mark grew more involved. He took on more responsibility at home and started bridging the gap between Susan and Bailey. One night, he pulled me aside. "She's scared," he said. "But she loves her family. I think she just doesn't know how to show it anymore." I nodded. Neither did I at first. Mark smiled, a flicker of hope in his eyes. We started creating small traditions, Sunday breakfasts, movie nights, short walks around the neighborhood. Susan joined us when she could. Some days were better than others, but every step counted. Bailey and I grew closer, our bond strengthened by the trials we'd faced. I often thought about the revenge I'd taken on Susan. The accident that changed her life. I wondered if I'd gone too far. But I also knew it was the only way to protect Bailey, to end the poison that was destroying her. It wasn't something I was proud of. But sometimes, love meant making impossible choices. Months passed, and the storm began to settle. Susan's anger didn't vanish, but it softened. The family found a fragile balance. Bailey and I looked toward the future, hopeful but cautious. Love had tested us, broken us, and healed us. And we were ready for whatever came next. You'd think that time would smooth things over, that weeks turning into months would grind down all the jagged edges left by betrayal. But time doesn't heal everything. Sometimes, it just teaches you how to smile while bleeding inside. It had been almost a year since our wedding, since Susan's outburst. A year since the accident that put her in that wheelchair. And nearly a year since I began pretending I was done being angry. Bailey was still the only person in the world I truly cared about. And she believed I had forgiven her mother, truly forgiven her. That I'd moved past the public humiliation, the smug expression Susan wore when she announced to the entire reception that her daughter had been cheating. That I'd forgiven the tears Bailey cried in our hotel room afterward, shaking in her wedding dress, apologizing over and over. She believed I'd made peace. But the truth was, I hadn't. I'd only buried it. And now, it was clawing its way back to the surface. It started one morning in early spring, when Bailey found an old photo album in our attic. She brought it downstairs like it was treasure. "Look," she said, flipping open the cover on the kitchen table. "Mom kept all these pictures from when we were kids." I thought she threw them out. I glanced over. It was all there, pictures of Bailey and her brother Mark as kids, family barbecues, beach trips. Susan in her 40s, smiling like the perfect mother. "I want to scan these," Bailey said. "Make a digital copy and give her a copy for her birthday." I nodded, but a dark thought bloomed in my mind. Susan's birthday. It was coming up. And I knew exactly what to give her. I never sent the first one. The one where I told Susan I knew exactly what she was doing on our wedding day. That I knew she'd manipulated her daughter into thinking she wasn't good enough for me. That I knew she told Bailey she could have done better, should have done better. That letter stayed buried at the bottom of my sock drawer. But the second one, well, I started writing it that very night. This one was different. I wasn't writing for closure. I was writing for clarity. I wanted Susan to know that what happened to her, the accident that left her in that wheelchair, wasn't just bad luck or karma. It was me. All me. At dinner that week, I stared across the table at Susan. She was wearing a new sweater, her hair brushed and neat. She looked older, but proud. Still sharp. Still bitter beneath the surface, no matter how many smiles she forced. Bailey was cutting vegetables while humming softly to herself. She hadn't looked this content in months. Maybe ever. Susan caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. "Something on your mind?" she asked. "Nothing important," I said. "Just wondering what to get you for your birthday." Her lips twitched in a mock smile. "Surprise me." "Oh, I would." That weekend, Mark came by for a drink. We sat in the garage with a couple of beers, talking about nothing, the weather, taxes, the usual. But after his second drink, he got quiet. "You know, I don't think Mom will ever change," he said. I didn't reply. "She told me last week she still thinks Bailey should have married that real estate guy. Trevor, or whatever his name was. She said Bailey's wasting her youth with you." That stung more than I expected. Mark looked down at his beer. "I'm not saying I agree with her. Just saying, you might never win her over." I chuckled. "Who says I want to?" He raised his head, confused. "Don't you?" "No," I said flatly. "Not anymore." I found one of Susan's old diaries inside a box Bailey brought down from the attic. It was small, leather-bound, with a broken clasp. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. Inside were notes, scribbles, rants. Pages and pages where she wrote down things like, "Bailey's too soft, he'll never amount to anything," and the one that burned into my memory. "Maybe if I push her hard enough, she'll walk away from him. I know she can do better. Maybe if I humiliate him, she'll finally listen." She wrote that before the wedding. And in that moment, I realized something: she didn't regret what she'd done. Not one bit. Even with her legs broken, even with Bailey drifting away from her, she still believed I wasn't worthy of her daughter. That night, I scanned every page and copied it all onto a USB drive. Then I printed a few of the worst pages, put them in a plain envelope, and slid it into her mailbox. The next time we saw Susan, she looked pale. Haunted, even. She didn't mention the envelope. Didn't have to. Her eyes told the whole story. She knew someone had found her diary. She didn't know who, but she was afraid. That fear was what I wanted. Not pain. Not violence. Just fear. A quiet, creeping fear that made her question if her secrets were safe. Bailey noticed the change, too. "Mom's been acting weird," she said one night. "She barely talked to me today. Just stared out the window." I asked her what was wrong, and she told me she thinks she's being watched. I kept my face still. "Watched?" Bailey nodded. She said it feels like someone's inside her head. I shrugged. Maybe she's finally realizing what she did to us. Bailey bit her lip. She asked me today if I believed in karma. On Susan's birthday, we brought her a box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a framed picture of Bailey and Mark as kids. Bailey's gift. Beneath it, wrapped in black tissue, was my gift, a second frame, this one holding a printout of her diary entry. The one that said, "Maybe if I humiliate him, she'll finally listen." I didn't sign the card. But I knew she'd recognize my handwriting on the quote. There's something strange that happens when you look someone in the eyes and know they're afraid of you, but can't prove a damn thing. That kind of power. It's quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't punch walls or raise its voice. It just stands there, smiling. Susan couldn't stop looking at me like I was a shadow now. Not a man. Not her son-in-law. Just a ghost with fingerprints. And I liked it that way. 2 days after her birthday, Bailey got a call at work from the assisted living staff. Susan had locked herself in her room and wouldn't come out. Said she was being hunted. When Bailey got to the facility, Susan was sitting in her wheelchair facing the wall. Curtains drawn. Lights off. Just mumbling. I stayed in the car while Bailey went inside. I watched through the glass, hand gripping the steering wheel. Every time I saw Susan's slumped figure, I felt two things at once. A strange kind of satisfaction. And something else. Not guilt. But something colder. Like the echo of it. When Bailey came back out, her eyes were red. She climbed into the passenger seat and just stared at the dashboard. "She's not well," she said. "I think she's breaking down." She asked me if you hated her. I kept my eyes on the road. "What did you say?" I told her no. That you forgave her. But I don't know anymore, babe. It's like something's happening in her mind. She's saying people are following her. Watching her. She swears someone left a microphone under her bed. I kept quiet. Let the silence answer for me. Bailey leaned her head against the window. She asked me something today I can't forget. What? She hesitated. She asked me if I was in on it. I turned to her. What does that mean? I don't know, Bailey whispered. She just said it like I knew what was coming. Like I let it happen. 3 days later, Susan called me herself. She never did that. Not once since the accident. "Come see me," she said. Her voice was different. Like it had been stripped bare. No more sugar, no more control. Just a whisper. "Why?" "I just need to talk to you." "Bailey can." "No. Just you." I agreed. Not because I owed her. But because I needed to see what she looked like when the guilt finally finished rotting her from the inside. The room was darker than I remembered. She'd covered the mirror on the wall with a sheet. The TV was off. No music. No sound except the ticking of the wall clock. Susan looked like a scarecrow in that wheelchair. Skin pale, eyes like storm clouds. She didn't even look at me. "I know it was you," she said. I walked over slowly. "Know what?" "You read it." "My diary." "You found it." I didn't answer. "You want me to lose my mind," she said. "You want me to see monsters where there are none." Still, I said nothing. She finally looked up. "You want revenge, don't you?" "I already got it," I said quietly. Her lip trembled. "You broke me." "No," I said, stepping closer. "You broke yourself a long time ago. You just didn't feel it until someone showed you the mirror." She reached into her lap and held something out. A photo. It was the one from our wedding, seconds before she stood up and ruined everything. Bailey and I holding hands, smiling, not yet destroyed. "I want to be forgiven," she said. I took the photo from her hand and stared at it. "You had your chance. I'm still her mother. You stopped being that when you tried to tear her happiness apart just so you could win." Tears formed in her eyes, but I'd seen enough crocodiles in my life to know the difference. These weren't about remorse. These were about losing control. So I leaned in close, lowered my voice, and said, "You should be grateful I only broke your body." She flinched. And then I left. That night, Bailey was quiet. Her hands trembled when she folded laundry. "She said you visited her," she said after a while. "I did." "What did you talk about?" "She asked for forgiveness." "And?" "I told her she should ask you, not me." Bailey swallowed. "She's scared, you know. Of you. She should be." Bailey looked at me, eyes wide. "What does that mean?" "It means I won't let her hurt you again." She nodded slowly, but the room didn't feel warm anymore. There was a gap between us, invisible but growing. 2 weeks later, Susan was found unconscious in her room. Overdose. They said it was accidental. Sleeping pills. Too many. But I knew better. It was a desperate move. Not to die, but to escape her own head. The guilt, the paranoia, the noise I'd planted there. She didn't die. They pumped her stomach, kept her under watch. Bailey cried all night. And for the first time, I didn't hold her. I sat in the living room, staring at nothing. I had won. But now I wasn't sure what I'd earned. I always thought revenge would feel like a clean cut. Like snapping a stick in half. Like justice done and dusted. But it doesn't. It drags. It echoes. It stains your breath. And sometimes, it doesn't end when your enemy falls, it ends when the people you love start to pull away without even knowing why. Bailey started waking up in the middle of the night, whispering things I couldn't quite hear. Sometimes she'd roll away from me without saying a word. Her eyes started darting when I entered a room. She laughed less. Kissed less. She still loved me, I knew that. But something had shifted in her. Like a compass knocked off true north. One morning she said, "I feel like there's a part of you that disappeared after the wedding." I looked up from my coffee. Disappeared or changed? "Maybe both," she said softly. And just like that, the silence between us felt 10 times louder. I went to see Susan again, against my better judgment. She was lying there in the hospital bed, wires, tubes, machines buzzing. Her face looked different now. Not from the accident. Not even from the pills. It was the look of a person who no longer believed they were the center of the world. I didn't say a word. She looked up at me. "You think you won?" I stepped closer. "I know I did." She gave the saddest smile I'd ever seen. "Then why are you here?" That hit me. Harder than I expected. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to her. Not to hand deliver, not to read aloud. Just to get the poison out. "You tried to destroy me on the happiest day of my life. You made my wife cry in her wedding dress. You mocked me for not being good enough. You treated love like it was some kind of stock option, and I was a penny share. You deserved worse than I gave you. But I gave you just enough to make you feel what I felt, small, powerless, and ashamed." I burned the letter in the sink. Because truth be told, no one else needed to read it. Not even her. A week later, Bailey found something I didn't mean for her to see. It was the backup printout of Susan's diary, the one I used to rattle her cage. I'd left it in the back of my desk drawer. Tucked behind some old tax papers. When Bailey walked into the room holding it, her hands were trembling. "What is this?" she asked. I said nothing. "You gave this to her, didn't you? That's why she's like this now. You did something." I looked down. Not because I was ashamed. But because I didn't know what kind of man I'd have to become next to justify it. "She hurt you," Bailey whispered. "She humiliated you. But this." She deserved it. Bailey sat down, slowly, like her knees couldn't hold her anymore. You didn't just punish her, babe. You broke her. And then she cried. But this time it wasn't just for her mom. It was for me. A month passed. Bailey visited Susan every week. I didn't. Our house felt colder. Our dinner table quieter. Then one Sunday, Susan passed away in her sleep. Natural causes, they said. But I knew the truth. Her death started the day I gave her that diary. The accident may have taken her legs. But I had taken her spirit. Bailey stood in the hallway after the funeral, black dress wrinkled, mascara smudged. She asked me to forgive her, she said. She said she saw it all wrong. That you were a good man. She said she understood now what love really meant. I just nodded. Did you ever forgive her? Bailey asked. I forgave you, I said. But not her? I looked out the window. There are some things you can't forgive. Only survive. It's been 3 years since that day. Bailey and I stayed together. But things were never quite the same. We loved each other, sure. We raised a daughter together. We smiled in photos. We made it work. But sometimes, she'd look at me like she was still trying to figure out who I became after that wedding day. And honestly, so was I. I don't regret what I did. Susan made her choice. And so did I. But I learned something in the end. Revenge isn't about justice. It's about dragging someone into the same pit they pushed you in. The only difference is, sometimes, when they fall in, you fall with them.